Welcome to True God Code. Please like, share, and subscribe. Keep exploring the truth of Scripture. The declaration of war before there was an Israel, before there was a temple, before the first empire rose or the first army marched, a declaration was made. It was made to a serpent in a garden, and it set the trajectory of everything that has happened since. God looked at the being who had just corrupted the first human beings and spoke these words: I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Most people read that as a general curse. It is not. It is a declaration of war, and more than that, it is a prophecy of exactly how that war ends. Her seed, a biological descendant of the woman, a specific human being born of a specific bloodline, who would arrive at a specific point in history and deal the serpent a fatal blow. The serpent heard this, and from that moment forward, the entire intelligence of the most powerful fallen being in creation was aimed at one objective: find the bloodline, corrupt the bloodline, cut off the bloodline. Before the crusher arrives, every empire that rose against Israel, every genocide, every expulsion, every attempt across 4,000 years of recorded history to wipe one specific people from the face of the earth. All of it, from the very beginning, is a variation of the same single strategic program. It started in a garden with 13 words, and it has never stopped. The Nephilim program. Before the flood, before the world we know existed, the serpent launched the most audacious operation in the history of spiritual warfare. If one human being, descended from Eve, would be the one to end his reign, then the solution was clear: corrupt every human being on earth. Leave no pure vessel through which the promised seed can come. Make the incarnation biologically impossible. Genesis chapter 6 records what happened next, and it is not mythology, it is history. The sons of God, in Hebrew, Bene Elohim, saw the daughters of men and took wives from among them. The offspring were the Nephilim, hybrid creatures, part angelic, part human, of extraordinary physical stature and power, the mighty men of renown that every ancient culture on earth has a name for. This phrase, Bene Elohim, appears 4 times in the entire Old Testament. Every other occurrence in Job chapter 1, Job chapter 2, and Job chapter 38 refers exclusively to angelic beings. The New Testament confirms the event twice. Peter writes that God did not spare the angels who sinned. Jude writes of angels who left their proper domain, held in everlasting chains. The program was working. By the time God looked at the earth, every human being had been touched by the corruption, except one family, Noah. Genesis records that he was perfect in his generations. His bloodline alone had not been altered. Out of the entire population of the earth, the messianic lineage had been reduced to 8 people. God sent the flood. The corruption was reset. The 8 survived. But here is the verse that changes everything about what comes next. 2 words embedded in Genesis 6, verse 4, that most readers skip entirely, and also after that. The Nephilim returned after the flood. The corrupted bloodlines did not fully die. They survived in diluted, suppressed form, carried in the genetics of specific post-flood populations. Numbers chapter 13, the sons of Anak, descendants of the Nephilim, so large the Israelite spies felt like grasshoppers beside them. Deuteronomy chapter 3, Og of Bashan, whose iron bed was 13 to 14 feet long. 2 Samuel chapter 21, a man with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, specifically identified as descended from the Rephaim, the post-flood giant clan. God's instruction to Israel to destroy specific Canaanite nations was not ethnic warfare, it was a targeted surgical operation. Those nations, in those locations, along the precise route of the messianic lineage, carried surviving Nephilim genetics. The war was not against a people, it was against the biological corruption that would prevent the promised seed from being born pure. The Gilgamesh Confirmation. In 1853, archaeologists excavating the ruins of ancient Nineveh found something buried in the royal library. Thousands of clay tablets inscribed with the oldest story ever written, the Epic of Gilgamesh, composed in ancient Mesopotamia more than 1,000 years before Moses put pen to parchment. When scholars translated it, they found a king, Gilgamesh, ruler of the city of Uruk, and the text describes him in precise terms: 2/3 divine, 1/3 human, a being of extraordinary physical stature whose nature placed him beyond ordinary human limits. 2/3 divine, 1/3 human. Do you recognize that ratio? A father who was a fallen divine being, a mother who was human, a grandmother who was human. That is a second-generation Nephilim hybrid. That is exactly what Genesis 6 describes. And the entire arc of this story, the oldest written document in human history, is the story of a Nephilim king consumed by a single obsession. He watches his companion die and is terrified by his own mortality. He travels to the ends of the earth. He crosses the waters of death. He finds the plant of immortality at the bottom of the sea, only to have it stolen from him by a serpent stealing immortality from a Nephilim king. The imagery is not coincidental, but there is something else in those clay tablets. Tablet 11 of the Epic of Gilgamesh contains a flood account that mirrors Genesis in detail that cannot be explained by coincidence. One man warned by a deity, a boat built to specific dimensions, sealed with pitch, animals taken aboard, waters covering the mountains, a dove, then a swallow, then a raven sent to find dry land, the boat resting on a mountain, a sacrifice afterward, a divine covenant made, the same event, described by a different narrator, written from the perspective of the people who survived carrying the Nephilim bloodline. Two independent accounts of the same historical reality, and then look at every major ancient culture that existed without any contact with each other. The Sumerians remembered the Anunnaki, gods who descended from heaven, interbred with humanity, and produced semi-divine kings before the flood. The Egyptians preserved the memory of the Neteru, divine beings who ruled before the pharaohs. The Greeks had their demigods, Hercules, Achilles, Perseus, the mighty men of renown. The ancient Hindus preserved the Nagas, serpent god beings who passed semi-divine biology through royal bloodlines. The Mesoamerican cultures remembered sky gods who descended, taught humanity advanced knowledge and whose return was expected. Every continent, every culture, the same memory, the same serpent, the same semi-divine beings, the same pre-flood catastrophe. You do not get this from coincidence. You do not get this from shared storytelling across oceans that were not crossed. You get this from a shared historical reality so overwhelming that every people group on Earth retained the memory of it, because every people group on Earth experienced it. Genesis 6 is not a Hebrew legend. It is the historical record that the oldest document ever written independently confirms. 6 attempts to sever the bloodline. Once God made his covenant with Abraham, and through Abraham with Isaac, and through Isaac with Jacob, the messianic bloodline became specific. It was no longer a general human population to be corrupted. It was a traceable family, a nation, a people with a name. And from that moment, that people became the most persistently targeted group in the history of the world. 6 major attempts, 4,000 years. The same pattern every single time. Egypt. Pharaoh looked at the Hebrew people multiplying within his borders and was consumed by a fear that had no rational explanation. His response: kill all Hebrew male infants at birth. A targeted biological operation. Eliminate the male line of the covenant people before the deliverer can be born. The midwives feared God and refused. Into that moment of refusal, Moses was born, hidden in a basket, placed on the Nile, found by Pharaoh's own daughter, raised in Pharaoh's own house. God did not just defeat the plan, he used the assassin's own resources to raise the deliverer. Persia. A man named Haman, an Agagite, a descendant of the ancient Nephilim-connected Amalekite line, obtained a royal decree from the most powerful empire on earth. The decree: destroy, kill, and annihilate all Jews, young and old, little children and women in a single day. Total elimination of every Jewish person on earth simultaneously. It failed because a Jewish woman named Esther was already positioned inside the palace, placed there, as the text says, for such a time as this. Haman was hanged on the gallows he had built for the man he hated. The Jewish people have celebrated Purim every year since. 2,500 years of testimony to the extinction that did not happen. Antiochus Thorpe. 167 years before Christ, a Greek king marched into Jerusalem, slaughtered a pig on the altar of God, placed a statue of Zeus in the Holy of Holies, and issued decrees banning the Torah, the Sabbath, and circumcision, the covenant sign in the flesh, under penalty of death. This was not religious persecution. This was a systematic attempt to erase the covenant identity of the Jewish people entirely, so that the specific lineage would dissolve into the general population and the messianic promise be nullified. It failed. A priest named Mattathias and his sons drove Antiochus out of Jerusalem, cleansed the temple, and rededicated it. That is what Hanukkah commemorates. And Jesus himself identified what Antiochus did as a type, a foreshadowing of something still coming. The preview has already run. The main event is ahead. Rome. 70 AD, 4 Roman legions, 1.1 million Jewish deaths in the siege. The temple burned to the ground, not one stone left on another, exactly as Jesus had predicted 37 years earlier. Standing in that very temple, the Jewish people scattered across the known world. But understand what this was and what it was not. This destruction was not Satan's victory. It was God's own judgment on the leadership that had rejected his Son. The diaspora was a chapter, not an ending. Romans chapter 11 is explicit. The blindness is temporary, partial, and purposeful. The day is coming when all Israel will look upon him whom they pierced and be saved. Medieval Europe. For 15 centuries, the attacks continued in different uniforms. The Crusades of 1096, when armies marching to liberate Jerusalem detoured first through Jewish communities in the Rhineland and slaughtered thousands before leaving Europe. The Inquisition. The 1215 decree requiring Jewish people to wear identifying badges, 7 centuries before the Nazi Yellow Star. The Spanish expulsion of 1492. 200,000 to 800,000 people driven out in a single royal decree. The Blood Moon Tetrad of 1493 to 1494, one of only 8 in 2,000 years of astronomical records, aligned precisely with that expulsion. The Russian pogroms driving survivors eastward toward Palestine, setting in motion the migration that would prepare the way for the miracle. The Holocaust. This is the one most people think they understand. They do not understand it. Not fully. Adolf Hitler was not primarily a political figure. He was a biblical occultist. His foundational influence was the Thule Society, an occult organization whose core belief was that a master race of semi-divine giant beings had existed before the flood, and that through racial purification that semi-divine biology could be recovered. This is the Nephilim program wearing a 20th century costume. Himmler's Ahnenerbe Institute sent expeditions to Tibet, Iceland, South America, and the Middle East, not to collect folklore, but to find surviving bloodlines with Nephilim genetics. They were running the same search that certain companies now run digitally. 6 million Jewish people were murdered, 1/3 of the global Jewish population, in 12 years, with industrial efficiency, and then it ended in a bunker with a bullet. 3 years later, 3 years, the thing that every single one of these 6 attempts was trying to prevent happened anyway. May 14th, 1948. Israel was reborn in a single day. exactly as Isaiah had prophesied 2,700 years earlier. Who has heard such a thing? Shall a nation be born at once? 6 attempts, 4,000 years. One outcome every time. The God who made the covenant is still keeping it. The rebirth and the astronomical witness. On May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion stood in Tel Aviv and declared the independence of the State of Israel. The British mandate expired at midnight. A nation was reborn. No people group in the history of the world has been scattered for nearly 2,000 years and then reconstituted as a functioning nation in their original homeland, speaking their original language. It has never happened, not once, not to anyone else, not before or after. The Hebrew language itself, extinct as a spoken tongue for centuries, used only in synagogues for prayer, was systematically rebuilt as a living spoken language in time for the nation it would serve. Every detail was prepared in advance. 19 years later, June 7th, 1967, the Six-Day War. Against the combined armies of Egypt, Jordan and Syria, Israel captured Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, the Western Wall. For the first time since 70 AD, 1,897 years, Jerusalem was under Jewish sovereignty. Jesus had named this moment specifically. Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. June 7, 1967 is the date on which that condition was reversed. And then look at the astronomy. In 2,000 years of NASA verifiable data, there are exactly 8 blood moon tetrads, 4 consecutive total lunar eclipses falling on Jewish feast days. 8 in 2,000 years, the tetrad of 1493 to 1494, aligned with the Spanish expulsion. The tetrad of 1949 to 1950, aligned with Israel's rebirth. The tetrad of 1967 to 1968, aligned with Jerusalem's reunification. 3 of the 8 rarest astronomical events in 2,000 years of records, each falling on the 3 most defining moments in modern Jewish history. The probability of this by random chance is so remote, it effectively does not exist. God said in Genesis 1:14 that he placed lights in the sky to be for signs and for appointed times. The Hebrew word is modim, the same word used for the Jewish feast days. He built the announcement system into the universe at creation. The blood moons are not random. They are appointments on his calendar, and there is a 9th tetrad coming, 2032 to 2033. The final program. For 6,000 years, every attempt to destroy the Jewish people and sever the messianic bloodline has failed. Every empire that rose to accomplish it has fallen. And so, the program changed. If you cannot destroy the bloodline of the coming king, if every attempt to eliminate the Jewish people has been defeated, then change the strategy. Stop targeting one bloodline. Target every bloodline. Target every human being alive. If the image of God in man can be corrupted globally and irreversibly, then what the king returns to is no longer what he came to redeem. This is the final upgrade, and Jesus told us it was coming. But as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. He was not making a general comparison to wickedness, he was pointing to something specific. The days of Noah were defined above everything else by one thing: the corruption of the human genome through the Nephilim program. Jesus said the last days would be its mirror. Daniel wrote this in Babylon in the 5th century before Christ. They shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. Daniel wrote this surrounded by the culture that preserved the Epic of Gilgamesh. He knew what mingling the seed of men had produced before. He was describing its return. The 7 streams? While Satan has been running his program, God has been doing something else. He has been publicly encoding the response in mathematics, in astronomy, in history, in scripture, in 7 completely independent streams of evidence that all arrive at the same conclusion. Not one stream, not 2 that could be coincidence. 7, each provable on its own terms, all pointing to the same narrow window of time, Daniel's 173,880-day proof. The prophet Daniel, writing in Babylon in the 5th century before Christ, was given a precise calculation. 69 weeks of years measured in the prophetic calendar of 360 days per year, from the decree to rebuild Jerusalem to the arrival of the Anointed One. The calculation yields 173,880 days. The Persian king Artaxerxes issued the decree on March 14th, 445 BC, confirmed by independent historical records. Count forward 173,880 days. You arrive on March 30th, 33 AD, the day of the Triumphal Entry. The 10th of Nisan, the precise day, according to Exodus chapter 12, when the Passover lamb is selected and inspected. A Jewish exile in Babylon calculated that date to within 24 hours, 500 years before it happened. Then NASA confirms, on April 3rd, 33 AD, 4 days later, the day the Passover lamb is slain, a partial lunar eclipse occurred over Jerusalem. The moon rose already blood-red. Simultaneously, the Gospels record supernatural darkness from noon to 3 in the afternoon. Joel 2:31 fulfilled literally in a single afternoon over Jerusalem. This is not interpretation, this is mathematics and NASA data. Hosea's 2-day framework. Hosea wrote, "After 2 days he will revive us. On the 3rd day he will raise us up." Peter writes that with the Lord 1 day is as 1,000 years. 2 days equals 2,000 years. From the crucifixion in 33 AD, 2,000 years forward, 2033. The 3rd day, the millennial reign, begins. The 7,000-year Sabbath. Genesis records 6 days of creation followed by Sabbath rest. The Talmud preserves the tradition, 2,000 years of desolation, 2,000 under the Torah, 2,000 of the Messianic era, then the Sabbath of the world. By any calibration of the biblical chronology, 2033 falls at the boundary between the 6th and 7th prophetic days. The blood moon tetrad pattern. 8 tetrads in 2,000 years on Jewish feast days. 3 aligned perfectly with 1493, 1949 and 1967, the 9th tetrad, 2032 to 2033. On April 14th, 2033, Passover, a partial lunar eclipse occurs. Exactly 2,000 years after April 3rd, 33 AD. NASA confirms it. The astronomical mirror, the complete astronomical picture of 2033, total solar eclipse before Passover, blood moon on Passover, total lunar eclipse on Sukkot, mirrors the events of 33 AD, with a precision that has not appeared in the 2,000 years between. The fig tree generation, Israel reborn in 1948, Jerusalem reunified in 1967. Psalm 90 says, "A generation is 70 to 80 years. Jesus said the generation that sees these things will not pass away until all is fulfilled." 1948 plus 80 years, 2028. The generation is alive, the window is closing. The apocryphal witnesses. 2nd Esdras divides history into 12 parts and records that 9.5 had elapsed by the time of writing, pointing to our era as the final portion. The Book of Enoch, quoted by name in the New Testament Book of Jude, records a 70-generation judgment window from the time of the Watchers, a window that closes in our era. 1st Maccabees records historical dates confirming that Daniel's abomination prophecy was only partially fulfilled by Antiochus. The complete fulfillment is still coming. 7 streams, every one of them independent, every one of them provable individually, every one of them arriving at the same window. We are in it. Why he will fail the speed of everything happening right now is not ambition. It is desperation. The architects of the modern program, the builders of the genetic pipeline, the AI infrastructure, the surveillance systems, are moving fast because they know the window they are working in is closing. They have read the same book we have. They understand the prophetic calendar. They know what the blood moon tetrads mean. They know what 2033 means. And they are trying to force their version of that moment into existence before God's version arrives. They are trying to beat God at his own calendar. They have tried before. Every time, with every tool available in every generation. The flood came and the Nephilim program was reset. Babel fell and the unified occult program was scattered. Haman was hanged on his own gallows. Antiochus died in madness in a foreign land. Rome fell. Every medieval empire that persecuted the Jewish people is dust. Hitler ended in a bunker. 3 years later, Israel was reborn. The pattern is not coincidence. It is the signature of a God who looked at the conspiracy of kings and empires against him and his anointed, and laughed, not because he is indifferent to the suffering those programs have caused, but because he had already written the last chapter before they wrote the first page of their plan. And the current plan is the most ambitious they have ever attempted, not because it is more powerful than God, nothing is, but because for the first time in history, they have the technical capability to move against every human being on earth simultaneously rather than targeting one people, one nation, one bloodline at a time. That is what makes this moment different from every previous attempt. Egypt targeted the Hebrew male line. Haman targeted the Jewish people within one empire. Hitler targeted the Jewish people within reach of German military power. Each attempt was geographically and demographically bounded. This one is not. The current program has 4 interlocking components. The first is identification, knowing precisely whose genome carries what. The second is delivery, a mechanism already proven capable of instructing human cells to produce proteins they were never designed to produce, deployed globally before the population understood what it was consenting to. The third is scaling. Stargate, the AI infrastructure announced at the White House, designed to gene sequence every person on Earth and produce a personalized biological payload for each individual genome in 48 hours. The fourth is permanence. CRISPR editing technology capable of making changes to the human germline that will be inherited by every generation that follows. Taken separately, each of these can be explained away as medicine, as progress, as public health. Placed in sequence, they describe something else entirely. They describe the most comprehensive attempt in human history to alter what it means to be made in the image of God, at the source code level, across the entire species, before the King returns to what he came to redeem. They are building Stargate. God built the universe. They are mapping human genomes. God wrote every genome. They are calling their project the Manhattan Project. God spoke the world into existence. They are not close to winning. They are in the last desperate sprint of a race they have already lost. Because the king whose first arrival was announced to the exact day, 500 years in advance, confirmed by mathematics and NASA eclipse data, is coming back, and he is not coming to a stable. The invitation. This is the most extraordinary moment in human history to be alive, not because of the darkness. The darkness has always been here, not because of the technology assembled against us. Every generation has faced tools of destruction that seemed overwhelming. But because we are the generation that gets to see the convergence, 7 independent streams arriving at the same moment, the prophetic calendar and the astronomical calendar and the historical calendar all saying the same thing simultaneously. We are the fig tree generation. We saw Israel reborn. We saw Jerusalem reunified. We are watching the 9th blood moon tetrad approach. We are watching the final program assemble in real time, visible to anyone with eyes to see it. The question is not whether God wins. That question was answered before the foundations of the world were laid. The question is what you do with the window you've been given. Because the same God who encoded a 500-year-old prophecy to the exact day, who confirmed it with a blood moon rising over Jerusalem, who placed a mirror eclipse on Passover 2033, that God placed you in this specific generation for a specific reason, not to be afraid, not to be paralyzed, but to see clearly, to speak plainly, to stand at the crossroads of the most consequential moment in human history and say, I saw it, I understood it, I told the truth. The enemy is in a hurry, because his time is short. That means the window to speak is also short. Not to despair, but to act. To wake the people around you who are asleep in the middle of a war they do not know is being fought. God's own instruction for this moment: come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins, and lest you receive of her plagues. Come out, not retreat into it, not be silent about it. Come out. The King is coming back. Every failed attempt across 6,000 years has been preparing this moment. Every empire that fell, every impossible survival, every mathematical prophecy fulfilled to the exact day, every blood moon that rose over Jerusalem on a feast day. All of it was the story of a God who never abandoned his covenant, never abandoned his people, never allowed the plan to be stopped, because he had already written what comes next, and what comes next is the end of the bloodline war. Not in defeat, in triumph, not with a manger, with a crown. Thank you for watching True God Code. Please like, share, and subscribe.